Hello everyone, I am Shamfa Cudjoe, your Member of Parliament for Tobago West. And you know we are always trying to do our very best to keep our constituents well educated and well informed. So we have introduced to our lineup Face to Face, which is an educational series to keep our constituents informed. And I am here with Ms. Glendora Lashley, who is our host and who is going to help me to bring the information to you. So thank you for tuning in and may you enjoy Face to Face.
Hi, welcome to Face to Face, a public education and awareness series with the Honourable Member of Parliament for Tobago West, Minister Shamfa Cudjoe. I am your host, Glendora Lashley, and together we will be exploring issues relating to the role of the MP and other matters arising. You can get involved by following the social media accounts of the Member of Parliament for Tobago West. There is Facebook, Shamfa Cudjoe, MP, Tobago West, Instagram and Twitter, Shamfa Cudjoe TT, and on YouTube you can look for Shamfa Cudjoe, Tobago West MP. Now, this public education and awareness series has been developed in response to the recognition that there's a prevalence of misinformation in the public domain about the role of the MP and other pertinent matters relating to politics in Tobago and Trinidad. In this series, you will get the opportunity to better understand some of these matters, as the MP will seek to provide clear and factual information. To start things off, given the current political climate, we are going to be looking at the very topical issue of Tobago's internal self-government, particularly the current draft bill that is out for public comment at this time. The Member of Parliament for Tobago West is a member of the Joint Select Committee of Parliament tasked with reviewing the bill, and she will be attempting to provide some clarity on the public survey that is being conducted at this time. Good evening, Minister.
Good evening, Glendora, and thank you for being here. Thank you for accepting to do this initiative with us. As a Member of Parliament, I always see it important to educate Tobagoanians to ensure that as we develop Tobago and Trinidad and Tobago, we take the people along with us. So Face to Face is our new initiative, and I think that you would have explained it quite well. So I thank you for being on board, and I am really excited about this new project, and I'm pleased that we are working on the internal self-government matter first and foremost, so that Tobagoanians can get involved, participate, and we could finally deliver internal self-government to the people of Tobago. So thank you.
You're welcome, and kudos on the initiative. I think it's extremely important, particularly for the Tobago constituents, to really have an initiative like this where you're bringing to them real information so that they can go back and do their research and better understand what's happening. Now, this particular process has been going on for quite some time now. Most people will remember 2018. So can you give us a synopsis of your journey on the committee, your experience with this from then till now?
For me, I am not just a member of the committee. Pleased to be a member of the committee, yes, but this is more personal to me, having observed and witnessed the process over the years. I remember moving back home in 2008 from university. I had just graduated. I came home, I was looking for something to do. I had a lot of time on my hands, and the conversation was in the air. I remember my aunt inviting me to a P&M Town Hall meeting at Bishop's High School. They were having, I think, a Tobago Island Council conference for the P&M, and I said, you know what, I have nothing else to do. I'll tag along, and maybe I would meet people to help to build my network. And the topic of the afternoon was internal self-government for Tobago, so that piqued my interest. As a student and a young person in Tobago, before leaving for college in the late 1990s and early 2000s, I heard much conversation and debate from Ho Choi Charles. He would have been our then Chief Secretary at that time. However, I didn't delve deep into the topic at that time as a young person. You heard about it, but you ask questions. Parents don't know the history too much, so they don't have too much to tell you. It piqued my interest then, but not enough for me to go and research and so on. But when I came back home and I heard the PNM speaking about this matter, I said, okay, I have time on my hands. Why not? Let me investigate. Let me find out what's taking place. So that would have been my first real encounter with in-depth conversation on the matter. And with that said, I really think it should form a part of our history for schools in Tobago, and I hope this process would get us there. But anyway, so for me, the process is way beyond being a part of the Internal Self-Government Committee here at the Parliament. In 2005, let's go back to before 2005, because the average Tobagonian, the average young person may ask, why are we here? Why are we doing this? Why is this conversation even necessary? Where else in the region is having this type of conversation? And this need for internal self-government. Why? And I listened to Trinidadians in Trinidad. What is this thing Tobago want? If they want to go their way, let them go their way, you know? And it's important that we as citizens understand the need for internal self-government and why it's so near and dear to the heart of Tobagonians. Our colonizers placed us with Trinidad. We were not always a part of this union called Trinidad and Tobago. In the 1800s, we were Tobago, our own island government, minding our own business, excelling at our own business. One of the most productive governments or countries within the Caribbean region. We were making good money through trade. So when our colonizers decided to leave us, so they placed us with Trinidad. And so we went from being our own man in our own house to now being a part of somebody else's house and being seen as a little sister. Some people will go into the history of telling you Tobago was a ward of Trinidad. And since then, the topic has been a part of all Tobago development. We want to get to that place where we run our own business, where we don't have to write to Trinidad or wait for the okay or approval from anybody else to conduct our business, and gives you that right and that responsibility to self-determination, to determine what you want for your development. So as early as the 1800s, this has been the cry. I think the modern fight starts with Robinson, A.N.R. Robinson, who would have been member of Tobago East. In 1977, laid before the Parliament a motion, brought to the Parliament a motion requesting internal self-government for Tobago, so that our desires and our aspirations to govern ourselves, to manage ourselves, to be in charge of our destiny can be realized. And at that point in time, yes, the motion was accepted and approved by the Parliament, but never really materialized, hence the reason we are still here. In 79, you had the Seamangal draft. But at that point in time, the Cabinet and the Parliament believed, well, okay, this thing looks too much like secession. You want to be a part of the unitary state or not? So it wasn't pursued then. In 1980, for the first time, we had the Tobago House of Assembly Act and the coming into being of the Tobago House of Assembly. But even then, that act did not reflect what Robinson had desired or envisioned, you know, what Tobagonians had clamored for. We then moved to 1996, where we had Act number 40 of 1996, that's the Tobago House of Assembly Act as we know it, and in that year you also had Act number 39 of 1996, which treated with the changes in the Constitution. And even then, we were not able to accomplish what we clamored for, what we desired, or aspirations, or even what Robinson had envisaged. So here we are, so many years later, might I say decades later, still treating with this matter. And It's so appalling and interesting to hear Tobagonians blame each other. Or some blame the PNM, some blame the UNC, some blame this one, some blame that one. And I think it's an easy thing that you should just be granted internal self-government. It has been a long, hard fight, and we are making strides. But I think it's important to say to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, if it could have been accomplished real easily in years gone by, I think it would have. You know, first thing first, this requires a constitutional, it requires a majority, a parliamentary majority of 3/4 of the votes to pass this piece of legislation, which means you have to have at least 31 of the 41 seats. The only time in the history of this country where any political party had that power was in 1986 when the NAR won 33-3. Yeah? At that point in time, Robinson himself would have, the same person who brought the motion 9 years ago in 1977, in 1986 he led the NAR to beat the PNM. He became prime minister. And it wasn't accomplished then. Later on, you would have seen Robinson became, after being prime minister, minister extraordinaire, and then president of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and even then it wasn't accomplished. So it tells you it is not something as easy as people think it is. It takes work, it takes research, it takes not just convincing Tobago, because I think all of Tobago wants internal self-government, but we have to convince Trinidad also, the opposition and the independents, because no time after 1986 had we had 33, more than 30 seats, any one party had that power. So we continue in the battle to try to accomplish this internal self-government and convince each other. So in the more modern part of it that many of us in my age group would have experienced, and probably you would have been 2005, when Ashworth Jack in the opposition, on the minority side in the Tobago House of Assembly, would have brought to the THA a motion asking that the government of the day, which would have been the PNM at that time, take into consideration internal self-government for Tobago in a very serious way, and that Tobagoans be consulted in an organized manner. That would have been in April of 2005. In November, in April, the THA created a committee to look at this. In November of 2005, the Select Committee reported several recommendations, including that we should go out to Tobago in a very organized way so that we could bring back the thoughts and capture the pulse of the people of Tobago. So in August of 2006, at that time Patrick Manning was Prime Minister, and the late Sir Ellis Clark, who was president, who had been president of the Republic at one point in time, had drafted a constitution, a new constitution. And Patrick Manning was trying to push that constitution at that time, but the people of Tobago rejected it. And we said we have our own process going on here, and we felt like this constitution does not cover the matters that are important to Tobago. So in October of 2007, the House of Assembly, comprising of members of the PNM and the TOP, they appointed an independent working committee, and many of us would know that as the John Prince Committee, a 7-member committee headed by Dr. John Prince, one of the most brilliant minds on the island at that time. And it was a 7-member committee, including people like not just John Prince, Dr. Pemberton, Dr. Rita Pemberton, Dr. Easton Mackenzie, who we all know and respect and admire, and Mr. Carlos Dillon and a couple others. So that work of going out and meeting the people to consider the House of Assembly Act started then in October of 2007. In 2008, that committee submitted a status report, and as the Tobago House of Assembly looked at it somebody said, you know what, let's extend the reach of this committee and ask them to not just look at the Tobago House of Assembly Act, ask them to also consider the changes that would be necessary for the Constitution. So it increased their workload and what they had to do. So they started with public consultations in August of 2009. It was August 7th of 2009 at Works Conference Room, and I remember attending that consultation. So that's why I say for me, it's more than just the Joint Select Committee, because I was there from the start, and many of us were there from the start. So this is really a Tobago people bill. From that point, at that point in time, I remember we were looking very closely at the St. Kitts Nevis legislation, and we invited the Premier of St. Kitts Nevis at that time, Mr. Parry. He came to Tobago and consulted the committee to explain to us how the Nevis Assembly worked. And so we continue to, reach out to the people and do unnecessary research. In 2010, May 24, 2010, the UNC, along with a couple other parties, including the TOP in Tobago, won the general election. So there we had a new government, and the then Prime Minister, Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, and Mr. Ashworth Jack in Tobago, they started talking about they would grant internal self-government to Tobago. They started talking about going down a different process or a different road than we had already started in Tobago, and that made us somewhat worried, because we felt like here we have a John Prince committee, we're doing our work, we're doing our research, we're consulting the people, but here is this new Prime Minister with the minority leader in Tobago, Mr. Jack, saying, okay, they are going to come up with a green paper and sort of ignore what we had been doing. By September 2011, the John Prince Committee would have submitted a report after 42 meetings and consultations across Tobago. They submitted a final report in September of 2011, and that committee came up with two draft bills. In December of 2011, our then Chief Secretary, Mr. Orville London, prepared a letter and sent it to Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar in her capacity as Prime Minister, saying the people of Tobago have done their work, we've done our consultations, we had our committee. Here you can find our two bills. We're asking for this to be the basis of the conversation as it relates to internal self-government. We're here, you're talking about something else, but this is all work, this is all position. Can the conversation at least start from here? And in that letter of December 15, 2011, Mr. London requested a meeting with the then Prime Minister to discuss the matter. After about a month and 10 days, in January of 2012, Mrs. Persad-Bissessar finally responded to Mr. London saying, we've received your document, I'm going to send it to the Attorney General. But 1 month later, the same Prime Minister, along with the People's Partnership, stated they are going to circulate a green paper, which is like the government's policy paper on something it's going to do for public comment. And what we found in Tobago is that, hey, this green paper totally ignores the John Prince Committee. It doesn't speak about our dreams and our aspirations. They're heading in a totally new direction, and it doesn't properly cover our concerns. So from February of 2012, from the birth of the Green Paper, you have Tobagonians uproaring. If you check the internet and you look at the different newspaper articles and so on, there was this pushback and this back and forth between the House of Assembly and Trinidad, and calling out each other for disrespect and so on. By March of 2012, the Tobago House of Assembly recognized, okay, the government is not pulling back its green paper. You can't beat them. You might as well find a way as to how you can influence the process. And the commission was set up with Mr. Alan Richards, Dr. Vern Allen, Deborah Moore McGinns, and Gilbert Peterson to examine what is being offered. They would have conducted about, I think it was 12 meetings throughout Tobago, and then submitted their position saying, hey, this thing doesn't suit us. Yeah? So the Prime Minister, the Chief Secretary, Mr. Orville London, kept writing to the Prime Minister asking for this meeting. So in May 24, 2012, the letter is dated saying, "Dear Prime Minister, I wrote to you 5 months ago submitting opposition and asking for a meeting, and here I am, Chief Secretary. You haven't convened a meeting with me on the matter. What is taking place?" So that's May of 2012. In January of 2013, the People's Partnership went to the Parliament and laid a bill. Now, January 2013 was the Tobago House of Assembly election was scheduled for the 21st of January. So the 7th of January 2013 would be 2 weeks, mere 2 weeks, exactly 2 weeks before the THA election. And the People's Partnership went ahead and submitted its position, a bill, before the Parliament. And it was debated 5 days before the election on January 16, 2013. And it was rejected. Needless to say, it was rejected. The people of Tobago rejected the bill. The PNM rejected the bill, saying, hey, this does not represent the dreams and aspirations of the people of Tobago. This is not what we desire. You've totally ignored our position. This doesn't suit us. 5 days later, on January 21st, that's the first time and the only time that the people of Tobago voted 12-0, totally rejecting the People's Partnership, totally rejecting the TOP. And in essence, for us, we're saying you disrespected us. We spent days and nights debating and consulting each other, and we submitted our position, and you have turned your back on us, along with a host of other disrespect. So here we are, 12-0. And needless to say, after January 2013, the Prime Minister, then Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar, just dropped the whole internal self-government situation as far as we are concerned. The Chief Secretary kept writing, kept being treated with scant courtesy, and but we were not discouraged as a people by that. We continue meeting, consulting, reaching out to Ashworth Jack, asking him to rejoin the whole fight, and so on. So for much of 2013, you would see Mr. Orville London writing to the Prime Minister asking, will you meet? Where's this process going? Yes, you've lost the election, but we are still fighting for internal self-government. You are still the government, and you have 2 more years to go. And you came to us. A matter of fact, Mr. Jack and his team, TOP, took Tobago to the UNC, saying we are only going with them because they are going to give you internal self-government. As a matter of fact, that was the sentiment. And okay, you can't just drop it like that. The election is gone. You can't just drop the situation like that. But we kept being treated with scant courtesy, and there was that back and forth. And for much of 2013, you would see that writing and asking for a meeting and so on. But we continued with our consultation. It is so funny. I remember this one newspaper article. It came across like a joke. Orville writes again. And it was making the Chief Secretary look like a little boy, because here he is trying to capture the attention of the Prime Minister, trying to get a meeting to deal with Tobago matters, and it was a sort of joke in the public domain.
What was your, what capacity were you in at that time?
So at that time, I'm an opposition senator, and I remember posing questions in the Parliament. Okay, when are we going to deal with internal self-government for Tobago? When is the Sherburne police station going to be built? When is the Roxborough police station going to be? So much development and much that was promised to Tobago at that point, it was just dropped after that election. And Mr. London and Ho Choi Charles got together and said, you know what? This is a Tobago people matter. So when Mr. London was writing to the Prime Minister, some people were saying it, the PNM writing to the UNC not taking them on. And we kept saying, this is not a PNM thing. This is the people of Tobago trying to treat with our business. So Mr. London and Mr. Charles came up with this Tobago Forum of the political parties. We are going to ask all the political leaders in Tobago to come together so that we could speak to Trinidad, we could speak to Parliament, we could speak to Cabinet with one voice. and we'll expand our consultations far and wide across Tobago and get every Tobagoan as far as possible to give them the opportunity to submit their concerns, their comments, and their recommendations. So from that time, or should I say January 7, 2014, the Tobago Forum of Political Parties met for the first time at Mount Irving, and even Mr. Ashworth Jack was there in that meeting on January 7, 2014. And the plan was, okay, we are going to speak to Trinidad, to the Parliament, to the Cabinet with one voice, consulting Tobago as far and as wide. The next meeting was planned for February 20th, and Mr. Jack didn't show. A matter of fact, the records show that he stated he has other engagements, and efforts were made to try to get him back on board after that, and he never came back on board. But the Ho Choi Charles, Mr. Neil Wilson represented the PNM, and Mr. London represented the Tobago House of Assembly, and they traveled throughout Tobago trying to get the comments of the people of Tobago.
Did anybody come to you at that time? You were a politician, a sitting PNM senator. Did any regular Tobagoan come up to you and say, well, Senator, Ms. Cudjoe, Shamfa, these are my concerns, so I don't understand it. Did you have that kind of experience with the regular?
Of course, because I followed the consultation. Everywhere the consultation went, I tried to make it my business to attend, because here I am sitting in the Tobago, in the Parliament, in the National Parliament, and it's my business to bring the Tobago's position to the fore. Now, at that point in time, the House of Assembly used to have something called, they used to go from district to district, reporting on the developments in the assembly, making it very personal. And I followed that too, because I'm gathering information so I could speak to the Parliament to say this is what is happening in Tobago. So I remember following the consultations and making my input and getting input from other people, because that is what we spent our time doing. 2014, 2015, schools, the Fisher Folk, went up to Bell Garden, Penny Savers Car Park, Hamden Lowlands in the community center, Mason Hall Government School, Bishop's High School. Traveled the length and breadth of Tobago, and even in Trinidad. I remember in August of 2014, we had a consultation at UE. So Tobagoanians in Trinidad had the opportunity to participate in the consultation, and Trinidadians who wanted to be a part. We also had, later on, I think it was in 2015, where the Chief Secretary went to Costat and spoke to Trinidadians in Costat too. So we spread the thing far and wide, trying to talk to as many people as possible, giving people the opportunity to submit their comments orally and written submissions. So I'll tell you something. Let me go back to 2013. When the Parliament took its break in July of 2013, because every year we end a session and take July, August off for ourselves, and then start again in September. And if you want the work of the committees from one session to go into another session, you have to move a motion asking that the work be saved. And an interesting thing is that July 2013, the People's Partnership did not save the work relating to, didn't save that bill to reappear when we reopen Parliament the next time. And that People's Partnership Bill of January 2013 never went to a joint select committee. So,
as you mentioned that, in terms of this current bill, is that what happened? Because I did not realize that this bill was still active up until the Prime Minister came out and said, the bill isn't lost, the work isn't lost. And I'm like, what is he talking about? Because I thought once it closed off, that was the end of it.
Right. If you don't bring a motion to the Parliament asking to keep the work, you lose the work, right? So anyway, no work was done on the bill, because after losing the election, After the bill not passing on the parliamentary floor, it was never brought back to the floor to even send to a joint select committee. It was just dropped in 2013. So even though the People's Partnership remained in power in 2014 and 2015, that, interestingly, that bill never made its way back to the order paper. It never made its way back to the parliamentary floor for discussion. It was dropped. So that is why when the PNM won the elections in 2015, in September 7, 2015, it was a new day for us, because one of the first things Prime Minister said to Tobago and to the House of Assembly is, we are going to take your position as is and make it the basis for the discussion, and do our best to take it through the parliament and grant you this internal self-government. We cannot do it alone. We're going to need the opposition and the independents and so on. So I think that helped to re-energize the movement in Tobago, and consultations continued up until 2016. So I remember the final consultation being October 2nd, 2016, and they're telling people, final call. As a matter of fact, I was able to pull up the flyer on the internet saying final call for your comments and so on.
Right.
And that consultation was held on the 2nd, and for the people who raised new matters there, they gave them 5 days to submit their written submissions by October 7th, and on October 27th, the final bill was debated in the Tobago House of Assembly and passed, that this is our position to be sent to Parliament on October 27, 2016. So on November 1st, the Chief Secretary took those bills that the Tobago people had worked on. We say, this is our position. It's not a position of unanimity. It's one of consensus. So we agree to disagree on some points.
Right.
But this is our position and our basis for conversation. Take this to the cabinet. Work on getting us this internal self-government. And that was 2016. He submitted that November 1st to the Cabinet Secretariat Secretary. And on November 30th, he wrote to the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, saying, this is our position. So if you remember, November 2016, 2 months later would have been THA election, January 2017. And we felt as a cabinet, we shouldn't put this on to the people at this very sensitive time. It would look like we're using it as a political football just because the election is 2 months down the road. Let's wait till after the election. And even we, as a cabinet, the members from Trinidad, the MPs from throughout Trinidad, they needed time with it to study it, to understand it, and to accept it as this is our position in the PNM and on the government side, went before the FGP and LRC and so on. And very early of 2018, we established a joint select committee in March of 2018. If I'm not mistaken, it's March 9th, 2018. We established a joint select committee, and we had a couple meetings, and our 7th meeting was held in Tobago. We came to Tobago on June 10th, Sunday, June 10th, 2018, and we met at Victor E. Bruce building, and we opened up the floor for comments, and we opened up for written submissions. Also, we received 31 written submissions. That committee of the 11th Parliament, made up of members of the government, the opposition, and the independent. And I would say why a joint select committee is important, because you don't want to trash out things on the floor. You're going to get rushed legislation, you're going to miss out some things, and you don't have enough seats to pass it by yourself.
Right.
So the Joint Select Committee gives you the opportunity to investigate, to research, to call in people, to ask questions, to do and get as much agreement as you possibly can.
One of the interesting things about the JSC, and I don't know if I should be ashamed to admit this, Dr. Rita Pemberton's presentation to the committee, that brought a lot of clarity for me as a Tobagoan, because I'm listening to you and your reflection, and I'm thinking we're probably on a similar thing, just that you were actively in the politics and I was not, so I didn't have to pay attention to too many things. But when she made her presentation, she put a lot of things into context. So some of the things that you mentioned before, in terms of Tobago's place when it became a ward, the fact that in 1877 we were a crown colony, and then we were at one point, linked with Grenada, and then St. Vincent and so on. And I think she showed very clearly, based on her research, what the fight is like between the islands. And that had me wondering, I wonder how many Tobagonians are actually looking at this, because it was informative in terms of understanding what you explained before, the pushback that you may get from the island of Trinidad, the way that the Tobagonian feels. Now that we're at this point, have your constituents said to you that they have looked at that particular video? The video is up on the Parliament channel, you all put it up. There's several things around this bill, but that bit of information, because I heard you talking about the way things appeared, and I'm wondering if, just as a regular Tobagonian, you know, sometimes we get laid back, we don't know what's going on, we're not necessarily paying attention, we're hot in the politics, but the information that we should know, we don't have. Did you all, or are you pushing that in terms of helping the average ones to really understand background information? You are forced to know it, because this is your job. The rest of us, not so much, but it's important.
You know what's interesting, Glendora, as a politician, every time I go on the TV and I have the opportunity to speak about this matter, I do. I've been doing so since I've been on the Joint Select Committee, and explaining to the best of my ability. Sometimes we pay attention to what we want to pay attention to, and you will find you have a lot of people who are involved in the politics and want to comment on the politics, but don't take the time out to listen, to read, to do a little research. And democracy is not about electing the government and then going back to bed and hope the government take care of it. It's a marriage between the people, between the governed and the government. So we need you to stay on board. We need you to ask questions. We need you to follow. We need you to make an informed decision. When you go to the polls and you place your vote, or you have a feeling or an idea about something, we want it to be an informed idea. And we think that it's your responsibility also to remain informed, because I could go on Channel 5 as often as I want to and talk to Brother B. Brother B may interpret it his own way and tell you what he wants to tell you. But did you do your research? Did you ask the questions? Did you do a simple Google search and say, hey, what happened in this year? What happened? You know, because I find a lot of my information by just going back and looking at the newspaper at the point in time. And you know, a lot of people are not really informed, because I remember for last year elections, August 2020, and people say, why I'll never bring the bill, bring the bill, bring the bill. If I let it care, I would have bring the bill. If you had cared, you would have brought the bill. And I'm saying, this is deep. This is a lot. This calls for a lot of research, calls for a lot of work. We reached out to governments and different areas that had similar experiences. I mean, different parliaments. We spoke to the Canadian government. We had consultations with the United Nations Development Program. Different consultants came in. We flew in people and sat with them. We met with the EBC. We met with the Central Bank. We met with so many different stakeholders that influence this process. And people say, bring the bill. Do you know what's in the bill? Do you know what you're fighting for? And you would recognize that there are some people who didn't even understand the contents of the bill. The same bill and the same, when the matter with the deadlock came up, and we were talking about the 15 seats, and people say, where does 15 seats come from? So this is from the consultations. You submitted this matter of 15 seats since 2016. So now how you have a problem with it, some people, because it don't suit you now in this whole deadlock situation, you know? So we try to keep the topic, I try to keep the topic alive. I do virtual town hall meetings once a month, and we talk about just about anything relating to development in Tobago. So it's important for we, the parliamentarians, to give the information and the leadership to give the information, but people have to be concerned about their development also. And we have to participate in the democratic process. It's not just on election day.
That is why an initiative like this program is important. Because earlier, as you spoke about following what is happening, we have two documents here, Tobago the Island Administration Bill and the amendment to the Constitution.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier, as we were talking here, the fact that you all invited the then Premier of the Nevis Island Administration. When we look at what is being presented by the committee at this point, at least for me, in reading through, I saw similar language.
Yes.
Right, including the fact that we're proposing, or it's being proposed to us, that our Chief Secretary should be called
a premier.
Yeah,
yeah.
right? And I remember having a discussion about that, and people were concerned. Now, the good thing about it is that this does not take the model of the Nevis Island Administration and just put it into the THE.
Right, and it's not just Nevis alone, because we have some elements of the Tanzanian government to some recommendations, like when we speak about the unilateral legislature, we got some of that from the UNDP and so on. But let me just bring you to how we got to right here, because we were talking about the Joint Select Committee. So by August last year, in July, we recognized, okay, we wouldn't complete this work before the end of our term. So we took to Parliament a motion to save the work, because we had done considerable work. I remember we received all these comments from the consultation in Tobago and written comments from people throughout Trinidad and Tobago. And it's only fair that we examine every single comment and do the research so we could explain to people, this is why we didn't accept or why we accepted your position. So we saved that work and brought it into this new Parliament, the 12th Parliament, and fortunately for us and unfortunately for some, we've won the election of 2020, and we've gotten the Joint Select Committee started once again. We have some new members on board, like you spoke about, but the work continued, and we were able to go back to some of the work you could see on YouTube and so on. So we continue to do our research, and then we examined clause by clause, and we fixed it into two bills, two draft bills, one treating with the Constitution and one treating with what we used to know as the Tobago House of Assembly Act, but would soon be known as the Tobago Island Government Act.
Right.
And we took all those recommendations and we said, we are going back to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, let them know what we have found, what we are recommended, getting their feedback, and we ought to report to the Parliament by May 31st. So here we are, starting off this consultation in Tobago. We hope to do about 2 consultations in Tobago and 2 more in Trinidad, so that the people could see the work that we have done and they could give some feedback, and we can get along with the work and really bring this thing to fruition in this term.